So today's session is called Aligning Your Impact Goals. And the real purpose of today's session, as I was thinking about it, towards the end of last year, I attended a webinar and was asked the question, what do you do when your organizational goals don't necessarily align with your mission? And I thought that was a really interesting question. And as I thought more about it, there is a lot of tact that goes into aligning those two things. And usually, if your organization's goals aren't in alignment with your mission, then there's a couple of adjustments that could be made. And so today's session, just thinking about all of that, is a few steps that I use to think about this when I'm either working with an organization or have been in an organization that really helps you understand where that alignment is and how you can kind of get those two things right in line with each other to work together. Since it is the beginning of the year, first thing I wanted to do is introduce myself. I think most of you know me, but my name is Carolyn Keller. I'm the founder of Curio 412, and our organization works with both for-profits and nonprofits to help elevate your impact. So whether you're a nonprofit that is looking to raise your mission up, or you're a for-profit that is looking to give back in your community, we'll do what we can to work with you and make that happen so that you can make the best impact in your community. So just a little bit about me right there. And the first thing I wanted to start with today that kind of leads into why I started my consultancy is to ask, what is impact? So impact means a lot of different things to a lot of different organizations. Sometimes impact in a corporate sense could be the impact that you're having on your consumers, whether or not your brand is making an impact. For impact in a nonprofit sense or for your organization, maybe it's the way that you're touching people's lives or transforming or changing people's lives through the work that you do. So when I say that I'm an impact management consultant and do this work, people often ask, well, what do you actually do though? And I always answer that by talking about what impact is. So impact is this change in people's lives for the better or for the worst. And when you think about managing that type of an impact, you're going to think about using some data-driven decision-making in order to plan, organize, and implement with a measurable outcome what your impact is going to do. And I really started to think about this after nearly a decade working in the nonprofit sector and realizing that in each of my roles, there is always something that ties back to that element of impact. So I've been involved with operations, grant writing, evaluations, and it always seemed that every year it was a challenge to figure out how we needed to collect and report out on our measurable outcomes. And we really very rarely ended up focusing on some of the processes that were in place to really report out on that impact. And I see we've got a couple more people joining us. So welcome, Catherine, welcome, Melissa. We're talking about impact and aligning your impact to your organization's objectives here. And so we're starting off with just this question of what is impact? And for everyone who's just jumping in, impact is that change in people's lives for the better or the worse. And when you think about impact, you need to be able to understand how that impact is being collected, measured upon, so that you know what progress you're making towards the goals that you would like to have in the community and you'd like to have for your organization. So as I started thinking through the work that I've done in the nonprofit sector, as well as the work that I've done so far as a consultant, I started to think about there's got to be a better way to manage that impact. So I started looking into different methods to be able to produce these measurable outcomes and think about how you manage your impact. And through a mix of these methods, that's how I've come up with this process of impact management. And so today, we're going to talk a little bit about that process and what it looks like and how that relates to aligning to your mission. And we'll cover a few of the tactics that I use to align organizations. And I think the question that you do need to ask is, why does managing impact matter? I think that there are a lot of really great things that happen in the nonprofit sector, and oftentimes that means that we're wearing many different hats and we don't have the capacity often to collect all the data that we want or analyze all the data that we want. And so it's important to remember that understanding and measuring your impact is no good unless you can strategically use that impact. So finding these areas that will really help you to see your progress, will make you set a baseline for tracking and scaling what your success looks like. It will also help you to cultivate support from your stakeholders and drive your objectives and goals. And when you're doing this, we'll talk about this as we go through today's session, you'll want to be able to do what you can within your capacity. So maybe it's starting with something small, with one simple metric that helps to show the impact that you're making, that you can track, and that you have someone who's able to help analyze and understand what that looks like. And just makes that a manageable piece of how your organization moves forward and thinks about impact strategically. So all that being said, now let's look at the agenda. That was kind of our lead in. The agenda for today is we're going to take a look at the 4 guiding principles of impact that we have. We're going to talk a little bit about measuring what matters most when it comes to impact management. And then, as the topic of today's session is alignment, thinking about how you can get your impact to align with your organizational goals, because your organizations do such amazing work. You want to make sure that all of those things are aligning to get the best possible results for your organization. So let's jump into those 4 guiding principles. So managing impact is something that shouldn't be an afterthought, because it is integral to the success of your programs, your organizations. And having sort of ad hoc attempts don't give you the clear big picture that you need to know whether you're making the changes that you want to. So as you think about impact, there are 4 principles that I want you to keep in mind. The first is to start with the end in mind. So impact is rooted in the cause and core of your mission and shaped by all of the strategies that you use. And if you start with your end in mind, thinking from the start what you want the results to be, this will help to pull your team around a common cause of where they want to be and help everyone to act within their piece of making that happen. And it will also help you to consider what success will look like. So if you can see the end and you can envision what it's going to look like for your impact to really make that difference, then you can start to say, okay, if this, then that, and really consider what pieces you need to accurately understand what you're doing. So most of you probably already have a program in place that you do, whether that is exhibit based in terms of museum and local history, or maybe it's educational based. And if you already have a program in place, but you want to be more intentional about your strategic impact measurement and management, this is also a good place to just pause and reflect and say, okay, we already have this program going, but what is the real end result we want? And if you are able to step back and reflect, you can kind of take yourself away from the day-to-day. Because from working in the nonprofit sector, what I know is it's easy to get fixated on the things that you're doing right now, and there's always 1,000 things to do and all of them are important. But when you step back, you might be able to use this as a tactic to organize and prioritize the things that need to be done within your organization. So this first principle for impact is start with that end. Always know where you're going. Secondly, we want to make sure we're looking at the big picture. So good impact management is about going beyond what you understand into the wider context of what your work does. So rather than counting all of the how many programs you ran or the amount of money donated or volunteer hours, you want to measure how those things made a difference for the people that you serve. And in order to do that, you're going to need to look at the big picture. So for instance, if you're a nonprofit that supports adult literacy programs, don't just count what you put in, but find a way to take stock of what outputs are coming or what outcomes are coming from that program. So you can ask yourself questions like, what did your help enable them to do? Maybe it's about how many people took classes and really got a lot out of those classes, or perhaps it was the ability of you to build capacity. Maybe if you are running an educational program, we'll use that example of adult literacy programs. Maybe there's such a demand and need for them that you, by building your capacity, are now able to offer more than one class and say offer 5 classes, and knowing that that is going to serve more people in that demand. So knowing that big picture, understanding what's going on, is going to help you to know how to use your resources and really create a great outcome. That's why look at the big picture is our second principle of impact. Third is going to be to center your community. Your programs survive because of the people that come to them and utilize them. So whether you're a service organization or a cultural organization, you need to work to understand how your programs and your goals intersect with your community's needs and values. So key to this is listening and having those conversations. And this can help you even reimagine what you first envisioned. Maybe you had an idea in mind and you realize that that's not actually serving the need of the community. It's not serving what people are expecting and hoping to get out of your service or your programs. So this can help you to think about how your impact aligns with the community values. And when you do this, you can get some nice data points that will really help you show how that has changed. And that's the third, is making sure you have their community involved, making sure that they have a hand in informing and driving the outcomes that you want to see. Lastly, here is examine your full impact. So the main question that comes to your program for impact, whether it, like I said, it's a service-based program or educational or cultural, is whether you're creating that change. But beyond that, you also need a fuller picture of the value of your program. So now that you've looked at your community, you want to know if your program is also striking the right chord with your team, the community, the public at large. And part of your impact should address that effect that your program and organization has on others. So not only is it aligned with your community as sort of an external, but what does the public at large, the greater region, think about it? What do your, I say employees, but employees can also be paid and unpaid employees. I'm sure there are some organizations on today that have volunteers that do a majority of the work that is required to make some organizations run, that are really valuable to the entirety of your organization. So you're going to want to know if the people who are surrounding you know why your programs exist. Are they enthusiastic about the work that you're doing? And some ways that you can do this is to take a poll or launch a targeting campaign to let you know. One of the stories I heard recently was about the company Patagonia. In 2016, they announced that 100% of their Black Friday sales were going to go directly to charitable environmental organizations. And they projected that their sales were going to be roughly around $2 million. But then that day came, Black Friday came and went, and their sales were over $10 million. So they had an idea that their team, their community was really enthusiastic about what they were doing, but the sales that they got out of that let them see and know a little bit more about what that community really valued. And so some of those, thinking creatively, some of those things I think might surprise you, and it'll also help you to put you on the right trajectory. So examining that full impact, that's the fourth principle that we have here for impact. So this is going to lead us into the next segment. So we looked at the 4 principles of impact. Now we're going to talk about impact management as it relates to measuring what matters most. And you can think about the 2 questions that are on the screen now in relation to your own organization. If you'd like, you can drop it in the chat and think more about it, or you can just write it down to yourself. The first question is, what is the specific contribution your organization makes to the lives of others? And then the second question is, what does your organization allow others to do or be? And as you're thinking about those, I'm going to talk a little bit about the graphic that's off to the side here, our big why in the middle. So why does your organization do anything if not to have a positive effect or outcome for the people or the community? And this is where you use this idea of evidence to outcomes, is thinking about not only what you need to measure, but thinking about it in terms of why, and how that why centers itself in your organization. This is taken from Simon Sinek's Start With Why, or Find Your Why. And this graphic is what he uses to describe how companies operate. He does a lot of work within the for-profit space, but I think it applies to the nonprofit as well, is that many companies or organizations know what their organization does. Say if you're a history center, that you can give history to the public. Many organizations know how your organization operates. So stick with our History Center exhibit or example, how you do it might be through exhibits, through programming. You might do it through special events or other types of ad hoc and very targeted and customized experiences. But then you get to why your organization is doing it. And that's important to understand because sometimes that why is a big motivator. It's a very powerful motivator. So knowing that why, we know our organization spreads history of the region. We know that it does it through that exhibits, but why it does it is probably a deeper seated meaning about creating a legacy for the region and making sure that people are valued in a number of different ways. And so there are some very powerful motivators that come out of that why, and understanding that motivation not only will help you to understand what motivates possibly your employees, your volunteers, but it will also help you to understand your audiences, whether those are people coming to use your service or people who are coming to view a cultural exhibit or something like that. So understanding that why is a powerful motivator. And when you can target that why, you can then start to think about, okay, so if that's our motivator, what then is the outcome that we want that's going to accomplish the goals of that why? And when you can understand that, you can start to measure some of the conditions that you want to see change and establish baselines. So baselines are what measures show about where we've been and where we are headed. So maybe if we are a cultural institution, we have visitors that come to see our exhibits, we are going to talk about audience numbers, how many people are coming in, and we have a baseline for our annual visitation rates every year. And then as we keep measuring that in the same way every year, over time, we're going to see fluctuations and changes. I'm sure a lot of your organizations saw that during the pandemic, is dips and spikes of what people are doing. And so we can understand a little bit about where our organization is and how it grows. And we can also see when those things happen, when we can turn the curve. And that's really knowing what success looks like, is turning the curve. So if your goals are set at a certain rate, you want to ensure that you're doing better than the baseline. And you can see that progress from keeping baselines about impact within your organization. And we'll have a couple of examples to share a little bit later. So the first thing I think about when I think about having these metrics, so I talked a little bit about establishing baselines, but the question is, how do you even come up with the baselines and metrics that you need in the first place? And so we're going to start by asking 3 questions, and there's always 3 questions about metrics and measurement. And our measures are important, not only for some of the reasons we've outlined already, but they do help us know if our program is working. And these 3 questions, like I said, are always going to have the answers to whatever metric you're looking for. So the 3 questions are, how much did we do? How well did we do it? And is anyone better off? And they all revolve around different qualifiers of quantity, quality, effort, and effect. So you can see in this top quadrant here of the graphic, top left quadrant, is where how much do we do? That's where that question sits. And it's at the intersection of quantity and effort. So maybe that's how many programs did we put on this year? How many people did we serve? It's how much did we do internally? Then you're kind of thinking about this next question of how well did we do it? And this is at the intersection of quality and effort. If you're running an educational program, maybe this is your student to teacher ratio, and you're understanding the quality of the program that you're putting on through ways in which you know that you want the program to run. If you know you want students to have a more intimate experience with their educators, then that's the area that you do want to consider student-teacher ratios. And then that last question, is anyone better off, is intersecting with both quality and quantity, but focuses on the effect. So this is usually what happens from all of the things that we did up here. So if we did 10 programs, we can answer, is anyone better off, and talk about maybe we ran some surveys at the end of those programs, or asked people what they thought about and gathered some data. And we know that 90% of people who came to our programs said they would love to come to another one. Or we know that there are a number of people who had the opportunity to come to these programs that maybe wouldn't have otherwise. So that question of is anyone better off really talks about the outcomes, who is being affected within your programs. And through this, what you will see is that it's pretty easy to come up with answers to how much did we do and how well did we do it. Those are fairly internal. But when we get to is anyone better off, it's a little bit harder because you have less control over what people say and how they experience things. And sometimes it's hard to track people down even. If you have a program that runs, I know one organization I work with wants to set youth up for career prep and career development, but it's a summer camp. And so they only run for a week. So they don't really know, unless they're able to track those kids, whether those kids are going into successful careers, but hopefully they have the skills that will enable them to go into successful careers. So sometimes it can be hard to track, 5 years from now, what was the effect that my program had? And that's why this is anyone better off is such a difficult thing. And I think it's one of the reasons that organizations have such a hard time with impact in general is because it is a long game. It's thinking about things from this perspective of over time, what is going to happen and how can we really demonstrate that those things are actually happening. So to give you a little example of what this looks like, I have two different things here. Both a fire department and say an education program. So this helps you break down these quadrants and figure out how to utilize them best in terms of your organization with two different examples. So the first example here we'll take of the fire department. So in answer to the question of how much did we do, maybe we're talking about the number of responses that a fire department responded to. In regard to how well did we do it, maybe we're looking at response time. The quicker we get there, the better we're able to stop fires. So response time is a good thing to help us qualify what we're doing here. And then in regard to is anyone better off, we can measure the number of fires kept to the room of origin and maybe the percent of fires kept to the room of origin, because it shows that we're minimizing the effective damage that would happen due to a fire in those situations and hopefully preserving life and preserving the property of the people who are affected by those situations. In another example here, we have education. So say you have an education program. If we're talking about how much did we do, maybe we're talking about the number of students. How well did we do it? I already talked a little bit about student to teacher ratio, and that's a good qualifier. And then as we're looking at, was anyone better off?
Friedman, trying hard is not good enough.
And then when we're talking about, is anyone better off with this education example, it's things like the number of high school graduates, or maybe the percent of high school graduates. And knowing those things and being able to establish a baseline and then watch those either excel or sometimes decrease. Like I said, change and impact is a change for the better or worse. So sometimes you might notice that things might be dipping below what you expected and you might need to have some changes and make some alterations. And that's always good to know too. But hopefully you're going to see that increase in whatever it is that you're looking to do with your programs. All right, so the next thing we have here is thinking about alignment. And when we think about alignment, and I should pause and say the area of impact management, thinking about your metrics, I do go a little bit more in depth, and I believe that our next, I don't have it up yet on the website, but our next session is going to be all about impact management and measurement. And we're going to take those examples and build them out a little bit more and talk about what that looks like. So feel free to ask questions either in the chat or after we cover everything here, but I'm going to move on to alignment, and then we'll go in depth with some of these other things later. But alignment is thinking about organizational objectives and those impact goals that you have and figuring out where those two things align. Obviously, every organization, whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, has results that you want to see. Sometimes with a for-profit organization, it's your bottom line. Sometimes it's referrals, or you're making sure your sales funnels are working well. Organizational results for a nonprofit probably revolve around a lot of what we call overhead costs, and we'll get to that. But then we also need to take those organizational results that we know we want and need to see and figure out how they align with the impact measures. So the more aligned that your impact goals can be with your organizational objectives, the greater capacity you have to make the impact that you want to. And this will allow you to scale and understand how to invest wisely within your organization to expand your impact. And so one of the examples that I have of this for today is thinking about a few different things here. So there's organization objectives on the left side here, and then impact goals in very general sense on the right side. And we'll start with organizational objectives. So this is just a general list of some things that like any organization, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, that you're probably going to want. You're probably going to want some financial stability, meaning you want to have diversity, whether that's diversity in funding, want to be able to grow your revenue, whether that's through grants or donors or earned income. You want to be able to manage your costs so you can balance your budget. Financial stability is very important for organizations. Next is maybe building a high-performing team. You want to be able to utilize skill sets so that your team, and I'll reiterate, team is anyone in your organization who's a contributor and supporter of your cause. So whether you're a volunteer or an employee, paid employee, you're part of that team. So being able to utilize skill sets to make the team more productive, make the team able to achieve even more than they are now. And while doing that, being able to retain those people, giving them the appreciation and showing them value and giving them opportunities to grow. Some other things that are on here are things like marketing or having improved reporting. All of these things are things that you probably have as an objective for your organization, probably in a more specific way, but even if it's just this general sense of lists that we have here, those are things that would really contribute to making sure you have a stable organization. On our right side here with our impact goals, maybe your program tries to build community solutions. So you're communicating history, you're building equity, maybe you're addressing food insecurity. You're going to have some sort of goal for a community solution there in terms of your impact. But maybe there's other things that you want to do with your impact too. Like you want to expand, whether that's geographically or programmatically. You want to ensure there's enough capacity to be able to do that. And many of the things that you see on the organizational objective side could probably help you to scale those things and to expand. So it's thinking strategically about how all of those things work together. And then you have things like maybe improved outcomes reporting. You want to make sure you have a greater opportunity for feedback from your community. You want to make sure you have a place where you can report on outcomes for the people who are stakeholders, who are donors, who are funders, who support your organizations. And this may include partnerships too, being able to work with partners, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, to fill service gaps and make sure that your communities are served to the best of their abilities. So if you look at these goals, like I said, they're very generic, and you think about how they intersect. When you have, say, a high-performing team of people who are engaged and enthusiastic to work with your organization, you're probably going to have a better chance of making and creating partnerships that serve the community, because you'd hope that those people who are high-performing, highly engaged with your organization want to help your organization and make those connections that are going to be possible for having partnerships. Maybe you, through effective marketing, you realize that you need certain things for improved outcome reporting. And so you can combine those two things as organizational objectives to really drive what you're going to be doing in a marketing sense, to also influence how you're going to need to get that message out about the outcomes that your organization's having. And as I already said, when you build that, say, financial stability or retain a high-performing team, your services will be able to expand also and just be able to scale. And so when you think about, I started out this session by saying I got a question at the end of last year about what if your organization's objectives and your impact goals don't line up. Maybe you want to do a list like this and have one side with your organization objectives, one with your impact goals, and really think about how they're going to support each other. Because at the end of the day, when you have those two things at odds, then it's going to make it harder to accomplish both of them. And this is where I want to talk about overhead. So I said overhead earlier, and we're going to talk about the myth of overhead, because as I just said, when you can't focus on, when you think that your impact goals and your organizational objectives are at odds, you always operate better when you have things that work in tandem and work together. But also, you always are going to operate better when you have effective tools to work better. So if you have computers that are really old and sometimes break down, that's going to impact your ability to work at the highest level that you need to. So having the computers that work, or effective phones, they all add up to how efficient you can be and how well you can accomplish the task that you need to. So investing in the growth and stability of your organization can help you attain those goals that you set, both as an organization and what you need for your organization to thrive, and for you to make the biggest scalable impact that you can. Overhead is also known, I guess, as the administrative costs or general operating expenses. It's not a word that tends to get a good reputation. Whenever people fund, they don't necessarily want to fund to keep the lights on or utilities. They don't necessarily want to fund all of the things that, mattresses you might need to buy, or computers or phones that you need to get. But they are those things that are going to make it much more easy for you to attain those goals. So when you think about that, some people tend to ask, what's an ideal proportion that I should have of general operating expenses to programmatic expenses? And I think that there's no magic number that is going to help you to sustain that, because every organization is different. And I think oftentimes, especially in the nonprofit sector, we worry that if overhead costs are too high, that maybe that's not going to be an appealing thing for foundations, and foundations might not want to give us money, or donors might not want to give us money. But I think more than that, it's trying to get the message across of how each of these elements of your operating expenses are going to contribute to your cause. You can't run a program, if say we're talking about an educational program, you can't run a program without teachers. You can't scale that program without either more teachers or aides, or a space in which to conduct that. And so all of those things make it possible to do what you're doing. So don't shy away from overhead. I think that there is obviously, as all organizations do, you need to focus on costs and making sure that you're keeping those costs in order, but you also need to operate well. So don't be afraid to allow that to help. All right, so the next thing here is a tool that I have used in the past that will help you think about communication within your organization, and think about how your organization is going to really break down those organizational goals and impact goals in a way that's understandable at each level. So at the top level of this pyramid, you have your mission. This is usually set by your organization vision and mission statements, and is usually pretty self-explanatory. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But if everyone at your organization knows that mission, then they're also going to probably have some goals that they have, and those are going to be your organizational objectives. Those might also, within those organizational objectives, that may also include some of your impact goals as well. These are usually set by strategic planning, whether that's a formal strategic planning, or that's just a group of people who are leaders within your organization getting together and selecting 3 to 5 goals that you want to accomplish each year. So those are the ways that we come by those organizational objectives. And then this last here is department and individual objectives. And I think many organizations do pretty well when they think about their mission and vision, when they think about their strategic planning, and then thinking about how that translates down. So there are, when you think about departments or individuals, if your organization is large, you might have departments. If it's a smaller organization, maybe you have one person that is the department, so that falls under individuals. But this is where priority responsibilities and desired performance outcomes come into play. And individuals can't make those determinations unless they are clearly communicated what the expectations are of those goals within the strategic objectives. And if they understand those goals and where their role falls within that, oftentimes they're able to make and set their own objectives that will work towards that goal. And having individuals at your organization involved in making those decisions about where they fall, how that works towards those common goals will make a huge difference. And as long as everything is transparently communicated, this will also help your alignment too, because then I know I've worked in a number of organizations where you have everyone kind of moving this way, and then one person is going off to the side and doing their own thing. And maybe that is a really worthwhile venture, but it doesn't fit in with the organizational objectives at the time. So there's ways that you can manage that and, adjust that to align. But when I've seen that happen, it's oftentimes a result of not a full understanding of where everyone is rowing. So there's a lot that can go into this transparent communication, but just thinking about that in terms of a structure of, you have the big mission, you've got your organization objectives, then getting everyone on board and making sure that they all know the value of each individual contributing to those goals. And lastly, there's a couple of common mistakes here that I see people make in regard to both impact management and alignment. First, and I touched on this a little bit, is either measuring the wrong thing or gathering data you don't have a capacity to analyze. So if you are an organization that has decided on certain metrics, but say don't have someone in place to collect them or store them or analyze them well, then maybe it's time to scale back, maybe pick one or two things to start. Ensure you have a person in place who's responsible for that, and then build on that as you go. It doesn't all have to happen at once. So I think just focus on your capacity and work within that capacity. I already touched on this, so I won't go too crazy, but undervaluing the necessity for operating support it is a kind of buzzword. It's something that people ask about, but as they ask about it, it's good to have a story and a message that shows the value of general operating support and its power to really elevate the mission and the impact that you have. Not setting goals is another thing that I see is you want to make sure that your organizational and impact measurement goals, that you do have goals, whether they're 1 to 2 goals, they can be very simple goals, but just something in place that helps you to know what your end vision is for what you want to happen within your organization and with your impact. And then lastly, ignoring indirect side effects. So sometimes when we are thinking about impact, and this goes back to what we talked about those 4 principles at the beginning, is there's always a big picture of, how are people experiencing your organization, your programs. You want to make sure that you're not ignoring the indirect things that are happening. Sometimes those indirect things might be a good thing. Maybe, we used that example of Patagonia earlier. You had a really amazing base of customers that really wanted to give back, and that indirect side effect would be something to pay attention to, because you now know a little bit more about your customers and where they're coming from, or your audience members or your visitors. If you're in the cultural sector, you might also have bad side effects that come along with things too, and you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those as well, because that is something that could affect your organization in the long term, and you want to make sure that you're managing them in the best way possible. So all of those things are important to keep an eye on and just watch out for. But I hope that through today's session, you're able to learn a little bit more about impact, how impact works within your organization, just some principles, things that can move your organization forward when it comes to management and measurement, and how important it is to align with your goals. So our whole goal in doing these sessions is to help equipping your organization to leave a lasting impact and have the resources that you need to do that. And so very glad to see everyone here today, and glad to talk to anyone. I'm going to stop our video and open up to some questions, and love to have some conversation with everyone. I see we already have a couple of things in the chat. Sorry, I'm ignoring it.